Alrighty. Okay, so we'll get going. It's going to be a little bit shorter tonight. Basically, kind of just a follow-up or building on what we were talking about last week. Just to kind of recap real quick, last week we talked about making sure that our radius of our turn, or the arc that we do through the turn, is as long as possible, because that allows us to travel through the corner as quickly as possible, basically. So the longer the arc, the longer the radius of the corner, the faster we can travel along it. One of the ways we achieve that, this is kind of the second point, was basically we're aiming to place the car as far to the outside on corner entry as possible, basically to open up the corner and allow for a slightly bigger arc. And what we're also trying to do is make sure that the car is properly angled when we start braking and turning into the corner. So i.e. we don't want to be aimed away from the corner when we're braking and turning, because we're increasing the degrees of rotation that we need to do through the corner, and that slows us down. So to build on that, basically, I'm going to talk a little bit more about car placement and how to achieve that, and we're going to talk about it through the lens of vision. Vision, like, we hear people talk about it quite a bit. Lots of sim racers on YouTube talk about vision, and in my books it's maybe one of the hardest things to actually get right, because you're so preoccupied with what's happening in the car. Things are coming at you so fast that we often forget to look forward properly. But what happens when we don't look forward properly is we can't plan for what's coming, and that's essential when we're driving the race car, because things are happening so fast. We can't be reacting. We have to be proactive when we're driving the car, and that means thinking about where we're going to place the car prior to ever arriving at the corner. And the only way we can achieve that is looking way ahead of the car rather than, just in front of where the car is at any given moment. Now, to make this easier for us, because, it is sometimes difficult, there's a lot coming at us, especially in a complex where there's multiple corners, we really want to pick just a few things to look at as we go through the corner, to be able to focus our attention on and to reduce the amount of input that's coming to our brains, and allow us to focus properly. So those three things, and this is kind of general or general knowledge at least, but if you allow yourself to focus on it, it really helps. So we're going to do braking point, your apex, and your exit, and those can be your 3 points. And the fourth point, if you really want to add one, I would say, is your turn-in point. So if you have choose a specific turn-in point, which is very often a good idea, that can be your fourth point to look forward towards. And I'll just run you through a lap here, and I believe this was the best lap I did. It's not very quick, but for the purposes of explanation, I think it works. So basically, and we'll run this slowly, what you want to do is, when you're here, you're approaching the corner, we know our braking spot, well, at least for me in this car at this point, is somewhere just after this little, the end of the green here. And so when we're coming at the corner, well, that's a little bit too far. When we're coming at the corner, we want to already be searching for that. That's how far ahead we want to be looking. So we're ready to place the car. We're ready to get as far to the left, in this case, as possible, to open up this right-hander, and we're looking for that braking spot. Now, as soon as we're close to the braking spot, not even at the braking spot, as soon as we're close to the braking spot, about to run over it, so roughly here, our eyes need to already travel right to the apex and start searching for our apex point. Because what's going to happen is if you in change continue to look for your braking point here, and then you're focusing right ahead of the car, what's not happening then is you're not looking at where your apex is, and you're not taking really vital information that you need to be able to make adjustments mid-corner, and and alter your course slightly with the steering or the brakes to be able to hit your proper apex and follow that through to the exit. So what happens is a lot of us get this really short-sighted vision because we're trying to make sure we hit our brake point properly, we're trying to make sure we get the car slowed down, but then we're not giving ourselves the information we really do need right about here to be able to make those adjustments as we get towards the apex. And so we end up kind of flat-footed, and that's where in some circumstances, and I'll show you another lap a little bit later of what that leads to, is like we get to roughly here and we're completely off our line, and it's like, well, how did that happen? It's because we weren't, we didn't have the end goal in sight. We didn't know what we were really looking for. We were just hoping that the inputs we had done at the with our car placement and our braking, and then through that section was going to get us the car placement we wanted on apex, and that's just really not consistent. You're never going to be consistent in it if you're not looking far enough ahead. So to continue with the example, let's just back it up real quick. This is so. We're arriving here, we're looking at the apex right over here, and then as soon as we get there, we're already looking for the exit. We already want to have our eyes where that's going, and then follow this through. We will slow it down a little bit. We're already looking at the apex here. As soon as we clip it, we're looking for our turn-in point somewhere around here, and then as soon as we get close to that, we're already looking here. Get here, we're already looking for our braking point. Up here, braking, we're already looking here. Immediately our eyes move. As soon as we've come to clipping the apex, we've already moved up to the exit here to try to spot where that grabs you. And that's the kind of over a series of corners, that's what we want to be aiming for. And I'd say on this track, maybe the most important place for that is the chicane up here. Because the higher speed you're cornering at, and so high speed combined with a quick succession of corners is, apologies for the dog, is going to be the hardest thing because it's coming at you so quickly. So if you aren't looking ahead, it's really going to cost you on corners like this. And you can kind of just imagine that. If you go through a corner like this, I'll run at full speed without saying anything. And basically, when you're coming to a corner like this, a fast left-right, something like that, is you're on the next corner basically as soon as you're through the first one. So, but you hit your apex here. Oh, awesome! I've hit my apex. You already need to be lined up and on the right direction for the second one, and that's pretty impossible unless you're already looking there. Not here, but even before that, because basically what happens is, come here, you turn left, you're spotting your apex, you've turned in. If you're looking at the apex, you know you've got the right steering lock on, you know you're carrying the right speed. Okay, here you should actually already be looking at the second one basically and lining yourself up for that. Am I on the right angle to get that second one? And what'll start to happen is you'll start to feel the car kind of float through the corners because you feel like you're not focusing specifically on any given point at any given time. You're kind of thinking the car through the corners. But what's really happening is you're onboarding more data than you were before. And if you're onboarding more data, you're able to react to that data. So what you're doing if you're not looking far enough ahead and you're not doing that consistently is you're limiting the amount of information that you're taking on about what's happening with the track and the car in real time, and that's limiting your ability to make adjustments in the car to fix anything that's going wrong. So the more we can look ahead and the more we can plan, for the corner, through the corner, and on the exit of the corner, the smoother you're going to be, the more consistent you're going to be, and the better placed car you're going to have. So that's why vision is so important. And I would say it's like I said at the beginning, is maybe one of the hardest things to learn properly, because it feels really weird at the beginning. And because you feel like you're not really paying attention to the track, and it takes a long time to get comfortable looking further ahead and kind of trick yourself into believing that you're going to be accurate on the apexes that you're barely looking at anymore because you're already moving your vision to the exit or to the next corner. And it's normal. Like you you're only half tricking yourself, because you are going to be faster doing it, because you've already looked at it earlier than you were normally looking at it. So it's all about planning, and then gaining that extra bit of information that you need to properly place the car. And I'll put a little note about racecraft here. Is one really great part about this is it helps you deal with all that extra information that's happening when we're racing around other people, because when we're practicing hot lapping, that kind of thing, we've really just got our own car to worry about, and we can really focus on looking ahead and planning everything. But you start introducing multiple cars, lap 1, lap 2, where it's really busy, and that starts to be a lot of information. But if we're getting used to looking really far ahead and planning our corner, well, that eliminates some of the stress of what's going to happen when we come up to the corner either 2 or 3 wide, because we don't, when we get there, it's like, okay, what am I going to do? But if you've been looking forward ahead to the corner, you're already planning things. That's part of the process that's already accomplished. So you can really focus on what you're going to do. Maybe brake a little bit earlier to make sure that you're not going to run into the guy directly ahead of you. You're going to place your car slightly differently now because you're slightly offline. But because we're planning that, we know that, if we're going to be more to the inside, okay, I'm going to look to the apex, but I know I'm going to have to carry a little bit less speed through here, and I'm not going to be able to carry the exact same line as I was before in practice. But that all begins to be planned out, so it's a lot more consistent, and we can be safer around other cars and crash a little bit less often, and obviously that leads to better race results as well. I'll pause here real quick to ask if there's any questions, anything that you guys struggle with in terms of vision, and then we'll move on.
I have a couple of small comments. One is that there's something similar in aviation, which is called being ahead of the plane. You want to be ahead of the car, planning for things that are coming up near future, not in the moment. Because if you're in the moment, you don't have, human reactions are not super fast, so you can't react fast enough unless you're planning ahead. The other thing is that you can practice this even outside the game. Like if you're sitting on the front seat of a car driven by someone else in real life, you can be thinking about, where am I looking? We are going into a corner that's turning right, so I'll look at the apex of the corner, just to build the kind of reaction, because it becomes very natural at some point. I find that when I'm looking at onboards on YouTube or whatever, I'm always looking at the apexes, the exits, the braking markers. It's funny.
Yeah, exactly. And that point, the first one about thinking ahead is exactly right. We simply don't have the human reaction time to be able to properly react to something that's happening now. And then the second point is really good too, and I agree that if I'm watching an onboard, I kind of find myself doing the same thing, and it's kind of because you're not doing the inputs, your brain seems to feel that it has the mental capacity to be okay, well, I don't need to worry about turning in for this corner, so I can already look ahead and see what he's going to do at the next one. But what we need to program ourselves to do is to do both those things at the same time, and initially that's what feels so weird. Is like, I've not even totally made my way through this corner yet, but I'm already looking at the next one. But you'll see if you train yourself to do that, you'll really begin to reap rewards on that. Any other questions, comments? Okay, sounds good. I will move on. Still in the same vein. But one thing that we want to be able to do is, not every corner is going to be, there's going to be perfect vision. I'd say T1 here is even a very small example of how it can be hard to spot. We can only really spot our braking zone quite late here. It's a little bit downhill, but it's also very flat. So if we're back here, when we're coming into it and going into the compression, it's kind of hard to spot our brake zone. And then there's other ones where it's basically impossible, right? We're going into a completely blind corner. This one being a really good example. We can spot our braking zone, but where the heck is our apex, right? So in these situations, we still want to be able to pick something solid, not movable. So in this example, do not pick this bollard here. Why is that? Well, that's because in virtually every race, this thing gets knocked off track, and then if you come up to the corner the next time and you've got no reference, what are you going to do? So we need to learn to pick things that we can, it's not going to be an actual marker, but maybe it's something you can line the car up with. So I would even suggest saying, before turn in here, so we're braking roughly here, and I would say, okay, well, this tall tree isn't going to move, and I know I'm braking and turning in roughly here. If I sort of aim for this tree, or maybe even the gap, because the gap lines up really nicely with the bollard when it's there, and we know that gap's not really going to change. I mean, obviously it's going to change angle as we go through the corner, but on our turn in, we can aim for this. Okay, perfect, aiming for the gap, and then obviously, it rotates and goes over here, but as an initial marker, that works as something we can turn towards, and we set our initial steering angle, and we learn over the laps to fine-tune that. But what we need to be able to do is pick things either at the side of the track, on the track, that we can reliably look forward as references. Another thing here would be maybe this Marshall station, so we know we need to be to the right of it, and then we can progressively pick things. So we do our initial turn in, but we start to get over that little crest, and we see this. It's like, okay, I know I need to be somewhere in here. So we start to pick things that, because we can't actually see the apex of the corner, we are still aiming at something visually to be able to look forward at the corner, so that we're not stuck in that trap of just like, oh, well, I hope I make the apex on this blind corner. Because it's, especially in blind corners, there's actually a lot of time to be made usually, because it's a change in elevation. It's a tricky corner. So if we can start to do those corners nice and consistent, that can be quite a big edge over opponents. So be sure when you're coming into blind braking zones, blind apexes, that kind of thing, or even blind exits, although those are pretty rare. Make sure you're able to find something, a solid reference point that you're able to use when you're looking forward towards the next section of the corner, to maintain that consistency, and be able to make those adjustments mid-corner. Because the thing is like, if you're coming into a corner like this, slow it down a little bit, you do your turn in, and all of a sudden you get to the apex, and in this case it actually worked out pretty well, but you realize, oh, I'm a little bit wide, or I'm too much towards the inside. This is really late, right? We're maybe 3 car lengths, two car lengths away from the apex. That's pretty late. But if you've picked, if you pick something, if you pick something that you can actually aim at when you're getting here, and you realize that you're a little bit off on your braking or your speed, then you can already begin to adjust. But once you're here, that's pretty late. So yeah. That's quite important when when things get a little bit more difficult and we're talking about blind portions of the corner. The other important part, and I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, is our vision on compound corners. So as the number of corners in the sequence increases, this section here is kind of a good example. These corners are pretty much taken flat, but you're clipping the apex here, as we talked about, and then you're using these visual cues all the way through the corner to tell yourself about how you're placed. So as we all know, this left-hander and staying tight to the left is pretty important, but it's actually quite easy. It's quite easy to mess up this initial left turn here. If we're not right on the edge of the track here, if we don't turn in right at the right point, it's quite easy to get off our angle on this corner, and that's all visual cues that we need to be able to make good decisions about what we're going to do in the following corner. So that looking ahead and basically keeping an eye on what's happening with the car is really important in compound corners, because it's going to instruct us what to do in the next phase of the corner. If I'm slightly wide on my entry to the first part of the corner, and then which means I'm slightly wide on the exit of the first corner, well, we can't go through the second portion of the corner the way we were planning to, because we're slightly wide. We won't be able to follow the same arc. That arc is going to be slightly smaller. We're not going to be able to carry the same speed, and we might have to alter what we're doing in the corner to make the best of what is now a suboptimal situation. So, a really perfect example is at Suzuka, right? You've got left, right, left, right, left, all the way up to the hill. And those are all compound corners. What you do in the first one is going to affect the next one, and so on and so forth, all through that section. So if you've done something imperfectly, either at the beginning or halfway through, it's definitely going to affect what's going to happen in the next corner. And you need to be able to take the visual cues of, okay, like I'm, instead of being where I am right here, okay, I'm a little bit here. Well, guess what that means? Either I have to, scrub off a little bit of speed and make sure I get the entry to this corner properly, or I'm going to just have to take this corner a whole lot slower because I'm going to be farther to the right and I just simply can't get over. So that's another important part of our vision, is we're using our visual cues of where the car are. And and don't kid yourself, right? I do this a lot, is like, you try and carry the same speed through the corner at the same steering angle when you messed up the previous corner, and even just a little bit, it's gonna make a difference. So make sure you're optimizing your car inputs based on the visual cues that are coming to you from your car placement on track. That's really important. So basically, the two main things we want to take out of this is you want to be able to predict where the car is going to be, and when we say predict, we mean, okay, looking forward. We're predicting by looking forward and saying where we want the car to be, not getting to it and then making our decision of where the car happens to be. And then second of all, if we're coming to a blind corner, we want to make sure that we're able to pick a reference that's usable, that we can align our car with at the very least, to be able to continue to use those visual cues. And then finally using those, the third point is using our current car placement, the visual cues, to be able to properly adjust our line through compound corners. I guess I'll make another quick break. Any questions or comments? Okay, sounds good.
Yes,
yeah, go on.
Oh, I guess one question I have, like, I'm thinking about field of view, just like uniquely as sim racers.
Yeah.
Sometimes the apex is in my left windshield or in my right windshield. Like, I'm thinking of Coda at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
Where you're far right and you're trying to hit that apex.
Yes.
What are some things that you use to align yourself to that apex when it's hard to spot?
Well, actually, this track, at least for me in VR, I don't know about you guys, but there's a corner that's like that for me as well. So just coming up here, actually, it doesn't seem like it would be blind. I mean, it's a little bit blind because you have a crest here, right? But because it's such a tight corner, our angle is actually quite wide into this, and exactly like you were talking about at Coda, although at a different angle, like, our apex is completely obscured, at least for the moment, when we're turning in by by the A-pillar right here. I believe this is the A-pillar, correct me, Ilpo, if I'm wrong. Yeah, so it's completely obscured. So what you want to do in situations like this is, one of the things you can do is make sure your car is properly aligned on the entrance, and this you kind of would be doing anyway, because you obviously want to make sure that you're braking in the proper direction. But the thing is if I know that when I get to here, my car is roughly aligned with this line, then I know that I've set up the corner. I've at least done my setup properly, and then I'll slow down a little bit more. And then when you get to here, you begin your corner rotation, and this is where you can. This is where I find this is probably the most difficult part, at least for me, is you could theoretically choose something on the horizon to say, okay, like when the center line of my vision crosses that thing, then I start to turn in. But it's a lot it's a lot of information to kind of download in a short amount of time. So if you do something like this, we're running at full speed, okay, perfect on the line, across the horizon, okay, now I'm turning in, and then you have to look to the apex. So there's a lot of different points that we're looking for. So what I tend to do is I run it out over a lot of laps to get a feel for what's the timing, rather than a visual cue in situations like this. And everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some people are absolutely going to need a visual cue, and that just works for them. But what I tend to do is work out the timing of the corner. So if I have a set braking point and I have a set brake pressure, and I know when I start to trail, so basically I've stopped the really slowing down portion of the corner and I've begun the trail braking section of the corner. Once I figure out that timing, okay, now I can initiate my turn in. And then over the laps, you also begin to learn, well, how much steering lock do I need to put in to properly make this corner? Now, this, I will confess, is for me one of the most difficult corners in ACC in terms of getting right consistently. This is an okay line, but it's not ideal. And I would say Coda's even more difficult, because the farther the corner the corner is away or the apex is away from you. And in Coda, in that left-hander after the hill, onto the back straight, right? We're thinking of the same corner, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep. That one's really far away from you. So not only is it blind initially, but when it finally does kind of hove into view, it's still quite far away, so it's quite small. So in a situation like that, what I would do is I probably would use visual cues. I would choose something bigger in line with the corner, probably behind it, that I could pick up in my peripheral vision, and sort of have in the left corner of my eye as I'm doing my braking and initial turn in, so that I can use my peripheral vision as I start turning the car to the left, to pick that up and begin aiming for that. And then slowly, as the car begins to rotate and you see that apex, you'll find yourself kind of naturally attracted to that point. And it's a lot of what we talk about in kind of any speed sports. Mountain biking is one that resonates for me, but you always want to be looking at the direction that you want to go in, not at what you don't want to hit, or where you don't want to be. So that classic thing of, like, if you don't want to hit this curb, don't look at the curb. Look where look where the car needs to be, not at what you don't want to hit. It's the same thing. So if you've picked a point that lines up well with your apex, but that it is visible, so something bigger basically, or really obvious, very bright, something a little bit higher above the track that's easy to spot, your eye's naturally going to be drawn there, and then your hands and feet are also going to be naturally drawn there. So that'll make it easier in those types of corners, but they are always going to be tricky. So it's not a question of making a tricky corner very easy. It's just being able to pick concrete things that you can follow that will make it doable and consistent.
Well, the other thing is that with enough hours of practice, you will become able to tell if you are on the correct trajectory, even if you can't see the apex. Like Coda is a very good example of that, where if you have enough laps on the track, there's enough visual cues on the track surface, on everything around the track, that you can, like, you're turning into that super tight left-hander, and you still can't see the apex because it's behind the A-pillar or outside your screen or whatever. But from everything else you are seeing, you can tell that, okay, I went too deep, I'm gonna miss the apex. It just takes a lot of practice. And yes, I will disagree. I think this corner is actually harder than anything in Coda, because there's no grip on the outside here. So if you mess up even slightly, you cannot correct. At Coda, you can always tighten the turns.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I really don't like this corner, but it sounds like Ilpo's on board with me on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I really don't like this corner at all. Because go on. Yeah, go.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think I'm hearing you saying, for me, because I've got a single screen.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things for me is to focus on turn-in points for that consistency. I mean, obviously there's feel, but to continue that consistency, because I can't even see the apex until I create my turn-in, whether or not it's behind it or not. I have to start to get a consistent turn-in point, and then pick my
Yes.
secondary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and what I would say is a consistent turn-in point is, going to be very obviously beneficial in a corner like this. But really, if we're talking about consistent points, it's probably, either third or fourth on my list of things that you should have. But ideally, you always have a consistent turn-in point, no matter what corner you're coming to. And I that's another area where I struggle in is I tend to do my turn in a little bit more on feel than I do on a concrete point. But the thing is, the more accurate we can get with all our inputs, so our braking, our initial car placement, our braking, our turn in, and then apex, and exit obviously, but exit is kind of affected by all those. The more accurate we can be on a lap-to-lap basis, the easier it is to fine-tune things, and that's why in a corner like this, obviously, I'll back it up a little bit more. That's why in a corner like this, if we watch my steering, well, actually, you can't watch my steering there. So I've begun to turn in right here, right? If I can turn in at that same place every lap, then then the information that's coming back to me about that turn-in spot is useful. But if I'm not paying attention to where I'm turning in every lap, if I don't have a specific point that I'm lining up with, well, then the information that's coming back to me is pretty useless, because if I come to the corner the next lap, I'm not turning in at the same spot because I'm not paying attention to it. So if I happen to turn in a little bit later and then I go a little bit wide, well, I may not have known that I turned in a little bit later because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing the previous lap. So ideally, like I said, you do actually have a specific turn-in point for every corner. In terms of a mental capacity, that's not always feasible. I would say, it's a very small percentage of sim racers that are at a point where they can have a specific turn-in point at every corner, at every circuit, and it does require a lot of practice laps to get something like that down. But I would say definitely, especially on corners that are difficult like this, where you cannot see the apex until extremely late in the corner, it's a really good thing to have, because it's going to give you that consistency and that feedback of like, okay, I turned in too early for this corner, which is really easy to do for this one, because what happens is if you run this corner and you've turned in and your car is way to the left here, you have to wait so very long to get back on power, right? Like we've all experienced that at this corner. If you're stuck here, you have to get the car rotated all the way around here until you can get back on the power, and it's extremely frustrating. The other thing you've done is you've slowed yourself way down, because obviously it's a much tighter. I'll actually draw it in this case. Thank you. I honestly cannot remember who sent me this, but thank you very much if you're here or if you're not here. But if you're following this line here versus following following the line that the car is currently on here. Let's back that up. This line versus this line. I'm terrible at drawing. This first one here is a much tighter line, so we're not going to be able to carry anywhere near as much speed. So all that to say, if you've realized you've turned in early at a consistent turn-in point, well, okay, I'll turn in a little bit later. I'll alter my arc through the corner, and then you can do that, and then have your new consistent turn-in point, and that's really going to help you in those difficult corners. Very long tangent for that question, but I hope that helps.
That was a very good point because it's very difficult and takes a lot of time to find those points for every single corner on the track. So start from the most difficult corners, the ones that are really difficult to get right just by feel.
Yeah. And I would actually say, so the really difficult ones, and I think Ilpo kind of meant this, but and it's actually what he was saying that jogged my thought on this is, difficult ones and important ones maybe is another good word to use. So I would say this corner coming up here, the right-hander, is probably a good one to have a turn-in point for. What I'd say for a corner like this is the setup for this corner is extremely difficult, and that's I'll use it as a segue because it's basically my last point of the night. Is the setup for this corner is very difficult. So if you've got a particular turn-in point for this corner, which I would recommend because, you know, I run it slowly through, even slower than that. It's very easy in this corner to either run wide or try and be really greedy on the entrance here, as it looks like I'm trying to be here, and you know, run it really, really aggressive here and unsettle the car and then run wide, or alternatively to turn in slightly too late and get horrible understeer and end up wide. I mean, that's maybe an exaggeration, but let's run it back from the same point. So, you know, run wide in this kind of example. So this corner is something that you want consistency on, because it's an important corner. You want to be able to carry speed through here. It leads on to a, you know, to use the trio's terminology, and isn't straight up here because you are full throttle for a while. So you do want to be doing this properly. You don't want to unsettle the car because it's one of the few places where if you do make a big enough mistake, someone can pass you on this track through here if they carry good speed and you don't. So, you know, this is another kind of corner where if you're picking places to have set turn-in points, this would be another good example. The corner's not blind, but it's an important corner. And like I said, I'll use this as a segue. My final point. So basically talking about vision and deceiving corners, and a little bit of what we were talking about last week. So properly setting up the car for corners that might be a little bit deceiving at the beginning. So the natural line through here is, you know, we're carrying a lot of speed, is to sort of do something like this. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you basically end up halfway along the track from here into the middle of the track. But if we go forward, I don't know if I can do that without this, but you know, if we go forward from here, if we're doing what we were talking about yesterday, or not yesterday, but last week rather, you know, the ideal line through this corner is you want to be parallel with this thing, you know, this curve right here, and you want to be following this arc like this. That was a surprisingly good arc for a mouse. That's what you want to be doing, but the car naturally is going to be somewhere around here due to that exit. So we have to be smart enough and use our vision of where the car really should be to alter our entry into this corner to set ourselves up for this, to make sure we're not braking, because you do need to brake for this corner, towards the outside, because especially in a really high speed corner like this, any angle towards the outside that we have while braking and trying to turn in is really, really, really going to hamper us in this section of the corner, because we're going to be struggling so hard. And you know what, even I would say probably in this whole section of the corner here, because we're going to be struggling so hard at that high speed. The tires are already under load. The momentum of the car is so great with that big speed that it's going to be carrying us towards the outside. So to get a good, nice turn in and proper arc through the corner with angle like this on entry is going to be really quite tough. So what I'll actually do is I'll show you this lap here first, kind of as an example of what it might feel natural to do if you're not paying attention. So, you know, the whole setup, we know we want to be to the left, but we're kind of lazy about it. We allow the car to drift a little bit, and then we're braking towards the outside. There we go. This is a little bit better. So, lazy about it here. Car drifts towards the middle. We have to reset ourselves up, and we're braking towards the outside. I'll back it up to show you guys. So if we check the angle of the car while we're braking, you know, it's not a ton, but we're aimed here. When really, what we want to be doing when we're braking is allowing the car to be something more like this. It's not going to be that much because we're carrying too much speed to be able to get it perfectly. And I'll talk a little bit about that kind of compromise at the end of this. But we want to have the car much straighter aimed this way. And what does that mean? That means changing the entry to the previous corner slightly to be able to, we need to change what we're doing in this section to make sure that we keep a tighter line and can get closer to aimed here, right? Because we're never with this section of the track here, that indent and the way it changes and the speed we're doing, we're never going to be 100% parallel. But right now we're aimed out this way, and we more realistically want to be on this line here. So, if we're not paying attention, it's quite easy to do that. But if we go back to the, good lap, not backwards though. 10 seconds forward. We'll run it full speed first. We hug the right side, and we really go to the inside. We really force it there, and then we can get a better angle. And see how much easier that turn-in was? It makes a huge difference, even just a slight change in angle when we're at that speed. And actually, this corner coming up here too is quite important. So it's something similar. We want to be at the very minimum aligned with this line here. But given that entry, it's really easy to be aimed there completely, or sorry, even more, like completely to the outside. So this is another corner where it's important. I think I gave an example of it as well here. So this would be being lazy on this corner, and you'll see how much of a difference it makes when you turn it here. Go really well. But you just can't make the corner, basically. So that's another corner where it's important. It's a little bit deceiving. We need to make sure that we're properly positioned with the right angle using our vision. And I'll go back and play this one for you, the fast right-hander onboard, just to see how tight we really have to make it. See how much more willing the car was to actually rotate through the corner as compared to this one. Like it really doesn't want to turn anywhere near as much. You really have to slow it down, and it doesn't put the apex. So that's the difference there of having the car just slightly a little bit more to the left and a slightly bit less angled towards the outside. Now, one final note on this, and this is kind of talking about that the compromise between carrying speed through one corner and setting up the next, and when it's faster and when it's not. And really, the answer is like just practice and test it, see what's faster. So we go through again here. Like we could theoretically lift here. And if we lift it a little bit, we could basically hold the car right to the edge here and continue to hold it along, basically right along the curbing. And we could probably, if we were going slow enough, not have to do that really awkward jink and line ourselves up even better under braking so that we were parallel to this on turning in. I didn't actually try it, but I've got a very big suspicion that that's actually slower than what we did here. So this is kind of a halfway between, right? We made sure we made the most of the turning capability of the car on entry. We weren't lazy and not paying attention, not using our vision. We made sure we lined up as best we could, but it's not perfect, right? I'm still sort of aimed towards the outside of the corner, not as much as the bad example, and it does turn in well. But we could also just physically test this on another lap by lifting a little bit here to allow the car a little bit more front end grip, follow this tighter, and then really line it up so that when we were arriving here, rather than having the car at this angle, that's a little bit far. Go forward. Wrong way. Rather than having the car at this angle, we actually managed to have the car completely straight, pointing this way. But we would have to take off a lot more speed. So that when you're coming to corners like this and you find that you're still not ideal, try it a couple laps, get it set well, and then try it the other way where you're taking a little bit more speed off, back here on your entry to this section here. Lift off a little bit, make sure the car's set up perfectly for this, and okay, do I gain time because I don't need to slow down as much here because I've got the wrong angle? So am I able to carry more? I will be coming in slower. So say I'm at 175 in your in this second example, and right here I'm carrying 199. So you're probably not at 175. You're probably at 185. You're carrying less speed in, so you've lost time on the entry. But am I able to carry more? More speed through here because I don't need to slow down as much, and how much time does it gain me all the way through here because I will probably be carrying more speed up to the next corner. So that's where you would want to test it and actually see, does it make a difference on the timesheet? And if it's the same, well, what's more stable? What's more predictable? Because if you end up with the same outcome but one is more predictable and stable than the other, then obviously go with that one. So that's where a little bit of trial and error, especially in these quite difficult high speed corners where you've got compromised entries, that's really going to help you. I think I will stop it pretty much there. I've gone longer than I expected to, but that's normal. I will open it up for questions because I'm pretty sure that's it. Or comments, for that matter.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
So, with bearing in mind how electronics could play a role into controlling the slip angle and yaw, I know each car is different, but so far, when I was watching one of the drivers 2 days ago, they used a really funky traction control setup on the Honda NSX Evo.
Okay.
And it seemed to actually make my lap times better. Because every time I used the default aggressive, it just made it worse.
Okay, so I must confess I've never driven the Honda, but you will have, you're obviously going to have differences between cars because of the way they're built and how the electronics work. Just out of curiosity, what's this funky traction control that you're talking about?
The TC1 and 2, like TC1, one person had it set to like 2 or 3, and TC2 was 11.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So that may just be a Honda quirk. And so you were saying, okay, there you go. Thanks, Oppo.
It's just like the Aston, where the way the electronics are simulated, it gives you kind of the most predictable response when you turn TC2 all the way to max. Similar to, I think, the Ferrari Evo, where you turn it to 0 to get the most predictable response.
Yeah, it's really weird, and I didn't know if maybe that person figured out how to get it to be more stable in general, or...
Well, it's just the meta in the Honda currently.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the same, like every car has certain settings that everybody finds to be generally the easiest to drive. I mean, we use TC2 at the maximum value in the Aston, not even depending on what you use TC1 on, because it just gives you the kind of most predictable car response. It's not necessarily the fastest. I mean, you could probably go faster with the lower setting, but it would be less predictable, and that makes it really hard to drive the car if you don't know what it's gonna do.
Yeah, because anytime it went below 7, it turned into like a completely different car in the same exact turns.
I will also add that I think in general all the default aggressive settings have the TC set to way too low values. Like, yeah, it's drivable, but it's not really what... Even the aliens would not drive it like that.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed so far as a recurrent theme in most cars.
Yeah. And so what I'll say to your initial point about different cars and different slip angles is so, like I said, yes, there will be a difference, especially at corners like this, right? Like, a nice twitchy mid-engined or rear-engined cough Porsche is probably going to be easier to maneuver through a corner like this as a general rule, because you can get it rotated a little bit quicker, which means you could get it pointed in the right direction a little bit quicker. But on the flip side of that, well, it's also going to be more unstable. So you've got to learn to drive around that. A couple seasons ago in Pro, I was in the Bentley here. I don't know if it's still the meta at this track, but it was extremely, really stable. You could carry great corner speed through this corner, but you had to kind of wrestle it to get it to rotate properly. And that's always going to be the case when you've got different manufacturers with different car characteristics. And what I would say is, and I've said this before in the clinics and I'll say it again, but that's one of the reasons why rotating through cars is not a great idea, because your reference for what happens in a particular type of corner changes a lot if you're changing through cars. And so what you really want to do is be able to build up a good database in one particular car, to kind of know what it's gonna do in corners, and also to know when it's not feeling like it should in a corner. So in my first laps here, I haven't driven ACC very much, to be honest, in the last little bit, but what I have been driving has been either in the Audi or in the Porsche, and I kind of just felt that the Audi was really understeering here. I for all these clinics, I basically just smack on the aggressive setup and change a few things, make sure the tire pressure's right, but I don't do anything else. But I felt it was extremely understeery here, and I couldn't make this corner very consistently. So I made a few changes, and then I was like, okay, this feels more like the Audi I know. It's turning better. But without your baseline of knowledge of how the car should generally react and feel when it's driving well through a corner, it makes it infinitely more difficult to make setup changes, because you're like, you don't have any real baseline to make those changes off of. The other thing too is there's something to be said for, I know ACC is quite, how should I put it? I find it quite sensitive to setup changes. And I guess most sims are, but there is definitely something to be said for learning the kind of physics of what cars are going to do through corners, based on where you're initially placing it and the inputs and all that, and then slowly moving your way to focusing on setups as well. Because if you don't have a good understanding of the physics of the movement of the car, yes, you can make setup changes, but you're likely not going to be able to get everything out of those setup changes. Again, another very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope that helped a little.
Yeah, that makes sense, though.
Yeah.
Actually, I would say related to rotating, this particular corner is interesting because in something like the McLaren, you don't really want to rotate in this corner at all. It has enough front-end grip that it just goes through the corner without any slip angle at all. I mean, there's always a little bit of slip, but you don't especially need to rotate the car. But in something like the GTR, which I raced it twice on this track today, you really need to force the car to go sideways with the brakes to get it through this corner, because it really doesn't want to. It just wants to understeer madly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I was feeling with the Bentley as well. And surprise, surprise, they're both front-engine cars.
I think all the front-engine cars on this particular corner, you need to. I mean, it's the same in the Aston. You need to trail brake the Aston really heavily into this corner.
And actually, I'll say a quick note here on trail braking. I don't think I've talked about this particular point specifically in the clinics yet, but and it's a little bit off topic for tonight, but hey, why not? When we're talking about slip angle through the corner, it's really important to note that it's not a jerky movement, i.e., it's not kind of a stab on the brakes and a flick of the wheel to initiate the slip angle that we're talking about. And I find that's maybe one of the things that a lot of the kind of coaching video, or not coaching videos, but like trick, pro tip videos that sim racers do. They don't really explain slip angle super well, because it's got to be something that's under control. It has to be, I would even go as far as saying progressive. So you're rotating the car with the brake, but it's not a kind of one movement thing. It's basically using your trail braking more to increase your front grip and basically subsequently slightly decrease your rear axle grip, so that the car wants to rotate through the corner more aggressively. But don't think of it as drifting through the corner, because I know a lot of videos kind of make it seem like that. And when I was, a couple years ago, when I was watching a lot of these videos, is that really, in my mind, that's what it was. It was this kind of small drift all the way through the corner. And technically it is a small drift through the corner, but it shouldn't feel that way. What it ends up feeling like is that the car is like on rails and almost turning itself. And it's a kind of an odd feeling. But just so you guys know that it's not, it's not an aggressive movement when you're creating additional slip angle and rotation through the corner. Yeah.
Also, there's a difference between kind of entry rotation and exit rotation. I found it easier to learn exit rotation first, because it's kind of very natural. You get your foot on the gas and the car kind of wants to go around and you just manage it. But entry rotation is kind of much harder, because it's also very dependent on how you set up the car. Like, what's your brake bias? If it's too far to the front, the car is just not going to rotate at all on entry.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Entry rotation is extremely difficult to learn, and even harder to master. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, because it's very useful, but you got to be patient with it.
I mean, that's basically, I think, most of the real difference. Well, I mean, obviously, beside being extremely accurate in placing the car in exactly the same place every lap, but one of the things that makes the aliens so fast is that they drive their car set up so that it will entry rotate every time, and they use that all the way to the maximum.
Yeah. And that's another reason why I would say, like, alien setups are not always ideal for people like us, because it just feels so unstable. So we can't, we often can't be consistent and accurate with that level of instability. But it's just simply because we're not used to it, and we don't have the baseline skills to be able to properly, take advantage of that kind of setup. So, having an alien setup is all well and good, but if you can't be stable and consistent with it, you're never going to learn. You can't build your baseline of car knowledge and car handling knowledge if you're constantly worried about spinning out and hitting a wall. So I would just, maybe advise a little bit of caution there in terms of when you're picking your setups of having some. You want to incrementally introduce your oversteeriness into the car. You don't want to go straight to it, because it's going to be really hard to learn the basics of the car that way when you've got something that's really nervous. But I'd absolutely agree with Ilpo that it's pinpoint accuracy in all phases of the corner, along with really having that corner entry rotation down pat. But I would start with the former when you're trying to learn to get fast. The accuracy is really going to help, because the thing is if you're trying to introduce the same level of angle or rotation angle into the corner, but from slightly, let's erase this to now make my point. There we go. So if the pro alien, whatever you want to call them, that's maybe a little bit much, is doing the corner like this, and they've got, X angle of rotation, which is going to be a lot because it's already, they're already a pro. If their car is placed here, and you, because you're, you or me or whoever is rotating the car through the corner from here, that space difference here means you cannot use X degree of rotation through the corner because it's tighter. So you're gonna spin or you're gonna go wide. It's simple physics. So the first thing that we all need to learn is, okay, how did the pro get here? What was the setup to this spot to be able to achieve this entry spot? And then after that, let's focus on this degree of rotation and being consistent with having that pointy of a car. But to be able to use that, you have to first be, as Ilpo was saying, extremely accurate in your placement, because then it doesn't matter what angle we use through the corner. We're not set up perfectly. Hope that makes sense. But yeah, kind of a side point for that. I think I will end it there unless there are any more questions or comments. No? Okay, sounds good. As always, DM me, post something in coaching discussion if you guys have any questions following up on this. And I will leave you with one thought. We've been through enough now that I think there's a lot of things that you guys can work on. And one note I would just make is definitely don't worry about trying to learn it all in one session or even practice it all in one session. What I would do is I would pick one of the things, if you guys are actually going back to these and trying to apply what we've been talking about, I would pick one thing in particular, and I would practice it for maybe half an hour or 45 minutes, because a lot of it's going to be, it might not be new knowledge, but it is new application, and that's just going to take more brain power, and it's difficult to get anything beyond about half an hour or 45 minutes of practice, because you're going to start to run up against this, you're going to be mentally tired. So focus on one thing, rotate it around, so that, in a couple different practice sessions, you're practicing a few different individual things, and you guys should start to see some improvement. And on that, I will bid you guys all a good night, and thanks for showing up.
And thank you once again.
No problem, and hopefully catch you guys on track soon. Take care, guys.
Take care.